Of the Midwest Fantasy Football League video recaps. We're still going on these things. Seems to be somewhat popular, anyways. We're about a quarter of the way through the regular season, as we do have a 13-week regular season. So we are starting to see some trends going on now with which teams are going to be contenders and which ones may be in the bottom half competing for the deuce this year. We'll see if those trends continue for the rest of the season or if things switch around a little bit. Top scoring game was John Bobbitt Chris taking down Goes Teddy Lee by a score of 137.36 to 83.78. Now, John Bobbitt, I now know what the joke is behind this after I played golf with Chris last week, and he had to point out that his two team names the last couple of weeks have been themed around when somebody loses part of their anatomy that happens to be very similar to one David Johnson, an injured running back from Arizona. So I got a good laugh when he crossed that to my mind, and I figured out what the hell he was talking about. The Bobbitts this week were led by touchdown Timmy Brady with a 39-point game this week. Also benefiting from this huge game from Tim Brady was Brandon Cooks, another player on the Bobbitt roster, who put up a 33-point game. If you throw in the 22 points from Antonio Brown, that's going to be a total of 94 points, which would have been enough this week to beat 4 teams with just those 3 players. So he had a good week from his stud. He put up another really nice game from Aaron Rodgers this week, 28 points in the Bengals game. We each put up less than a point this week, which did not help out the team effort. With the win, Chris actually moves to an impressive 7-0 all-time record facing Lee during the regular season. So this week's big blowout, Derek's sensitive nipples took down Josh's I win because y'all drafted 123.34 to 56.42, a 66.9 point margin from Todd Gurley on Thursday Night Football this week, putting up 38 points on Thursday night. Devonta Parker, Ryan the Suckup, and Ezekiel Elliott. He could have probably snagged the top score this week. He was only 15 points down from that. However, his tight end spot put up a big old goose egg, and his defense also managed to contribute less than a point. So defenses this week seemed like they were pretty sketchy across the board. Josh's team had a really offensive struggle this week. The 2 leading scorers on their roster was Matt Bryant, his kicker, and his defense, Houston, who put up 11 points. So they only managed to put up about half of that total this week. Part of the blame can really be found with his keeper selections. His 3 keepers this week were all in the starting lineup, but Isaiah Crowell, Martellus Bennett, and Jay Ajayi only managed to combine for 12.5 points. This game, T-Boeing 747 Nick came up on the short end of the coin this time, narrowly taking the loss, losing to Gronky Kong, myself, by a score of 117.44 to 115.92, a margin of only about 1.5 points. Gronky Kong, my team this week, was led to victory by A.J. Green, having a big game against the Packers, which fortunately wasn't enough to get Cincinnati to win, which was definitely what I would have rather seen. So his 22 points combining with Gronk's 19 points led the team this week. For T-Boeing, there's only one man's name to say. Jason Witten, Jason Witten, Jason Witten. How have ye forsaken me? 28 points, and Devonta Freeman with 24 points. Up a 20-point game last week, Nick needed just 2.3 points on Monday Night Football this week to secure the win. Unfortunately, Jason Witten only managed to put up 1 catch on 4 targets for 3 yards this week, combining for a total of 0.8 points. Refuses to take a loss and stays undefeated by taking down Awesome Possum, Pope 1.0, 96-92. Despite grabbing the win and moving to 3-0, he still falls to second place, moving behind Chris. Junkies this week, Andy, by a high-scoring game, 124 to 103. The second coming Pope 2.0, defending champion, finally grabbed his first win of the season by force, defeating Pray for Mojo Jason by a 54-point margin, 139 to 80. A little bit of new stuff this week. I think I'm going to highlight how last week's picks went before talking about this week's picks. So last week's big pick of the week was J.J. Nelson, the wide receiver for Arizona, which Chris picked up for $28, so a sizable amount of money out of his $100 for the whole season. For that hefty chunk of change, he was promptly rewarded with 0 catches and 0 points on 3 targets. Fortunately for Chris, that goose egg was on his bench this week. The next 2 guys, they were in the starting lineups this week. Trevor for Knicks, Andrew Luckless T-Boeing 747s, and Hunter Henry couldn't even muster a single target, getting 0 points for Derek, 0 catches, and being dumped back to the waiver wire. A little bit better for everybody, so we'll see what happens. We'll have good games next week, with the possible exception of Greg Olsen, currently on IR, the starting Carolina tight end. I suspect that a couple teams wanted to grab him after seeing him on the waiver wire and stash him in their IR spot, with the potential of holding him as a keeper for next year. Pope 1.0 was the high bidder for $6 for grabbing his services. We'll see if his IR spot doesn't get needed by somebody more important, but for now, it's a potential keeper for next year. Man was Wendell Smallwood, the new third down back for Philadelphia Eagles. He's going to be picking up the touches that were previously going to Darren Sproles, who was lost this season with a torn ACL and a broken arm this week. It's unfortunately for Darren Sproles, who's 34. It's getting a little bit late in his career, and this is probably going to be it for him. Smallwood this week. I happen to be the winning bidder, but it did cost me. I spent $20 to do so, which was nearly triple the next highest bid of $8. So we'll see if I have better luck than most of the waiver claims from last week. This week were Marquise Lee, who went to Brandon, and Charles Clay, who went to Derek. Both of these guys starred offensively for Jacksonville and Buffalo, and 2 teams that aren't necessarily known for their high-scoring offenses. But we'll see if they can keep it going next week. It was completed. Nick and I's head-to-head matchup went my way. So I get free wings and beer, and Nick gets to pay for it. That sounds like 2 wins for me that are noteworthy. Derek happens to be playing me, which is fairly good timing, as Derek is crashing on my couch this week when he goes to the Sonic Boom show in Janesville this weekend. So I will be around to make fun of him and talk shit to him as much as possible. You know, more than normal. Should be able to finally grab his first win. He's currently sitting in 12th, but he does play Lee, who's currently sitting in 10th place. There's the possibility that he could get on the board for the deuce running. The 2 youngins is going to be hurting after this week. Eric and Nick, one of you guys is going to be falling to 1 and 3, really hurting for your chances on the playoffs. With Eric being the defending champion and Nick being the perennial championship team, who knows? One of you guys is really going to be hurting after this week. Guess that's it. We'll see you next week.